Expedition. True stories of man's quest for the unknown. Through the steaming jungles. Across the burning desert. To the depths of treacherous seas. And to the highest mountains of the world. Expedition. Actual films of the great expeditions of our time, recorded as they happened. Your host is the famous deep-sea diver, author, and explorer, Colonel John D. Craig. And here is Colonel Craig.
This, as you can see, is scuba diving equipment, and I've used it in many parts of the world. But tonight, you're going to see some Navy divers using gear like it to explore the underside of the Arctic pack ice, not too far from the North Pole. It was all part of the mission of the atomic submarine USS Seadragon on its history-making conquest of the Northwest Passage. We'll see the actual films of this epic voyage after this brief time out. Not so long ago, the world was startled by an amazing naval achievement. The atomic submarine Seadragon had sailed the Northwest Passage from the Atlantic to the Pacific under the Arctic ice. We're very fortunate to have with us a man who knows a lot more about it than I do, Commander George P. Steele, who was captain of the Seadragon on her Arctic voyage. Commander, welcome to Expedition.
It's good to be here.
After reading about your naval career, frankly, I was expecting a much older man.
The submarine service is a young service, and my crew would think I was pretty old. They averaged about 10 years younger.
We have a model here of the Seadragon. Will you tell us something about it?
Yes, it's about the length of a football field, and this place is 3,000 tons submerged. The most important part of it is the nuclear reactor located right in here. That was put in the ship by Admiral Rickover and his organization, and it enabled us to stay down for such a long time. Along the top of the ship and in the bow are the electronic eyes that let us see the ice, and it proved so good that we could pass the ship with a clearance about that much underneath the ice, and in some cases the bottom was about the same distance from us.
It must take a great deal of technical knowledge to command such a ship.
Well, I had 15 years in submarines and then underwent a rigorous training under Admiral Rickover.
Well, I wish you'd show us in a little more detail just where you went with the Seadragon.
We left Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and went up between the Canadian archipelago and Greenland. We met our first ice and icebergs in Baffin Bay. And we went through the Parry Channel, passing under the Arctic, the polar ice, and went on up to the North Pole, and then back down to Nome, Alaska, and then on down to Pearl Harbor.
Commander, what were some of the bigger problems you faced?
Well, we were following in the footsteps of the Nautilus, the Skate, and the Sargo in the investigation of a nuclear submarine's ability to operate in that environment. And our specific job was to operate around and under icebergs and to see what we could do in the narrow channels of the Canadian archipelago, see what our electronic eyes could do up there. And we were attempting to find a short submarine route between the Atlantic and the Pacific, and this we did.
You know, the advances in science are coming so fast I can't keep up with them. Only a few summers ago, it was a sensational achievement when a big Canadian Navy icebreaker forced her way through the Northwest Passage.
Yes, and John, Commodore Robertson of the Canadian Navy, the captain of that icebreaker, was on board the Seadragon with me. And we marveled at the ability of the Seadragon to go through that channel any time of the year, whereas the Canadian icebreaker would have had to pick the relatively ice-free weeks.
That's great. And suppose we get underway.
The Seadragon was ready to get underway from the naval shipyard here at Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The story had been released that we were going to the North Pole, but we still hoped to slip away quietly. To me, it was amusing. At that moment, our TV camera was recording our departure, and Dick Thompson was below saying, "What the people on the pier don't know is our secret mission, the first attempt at a Northwest Passage ever made by a submarine." Commander Carl Peterson, base chaplain, gave the invocation. As soon as I could politely break away from reporters who were asking too many questions, I went aboard. There were 102 of us, officers, civilian scientists, and crew. This was it. At long last, we were really casting off. Everyone was in great spirits. The long months of preparation were over. the thousands of details, from the installation of brand new electronic gear to the transportation of our families to Hawaii, everything had been taken care of. Finally, we were underway. In a few minutes, we had moved out into the current, swung around and gathered way. I'd commanded the Seadragon from her first sea trials. Now she was off on her own, a beautiful, trim fighting ship facing her first great adventure. As soon as we cleared the channel, we submerged. An atomic submarine travels faster and more efficiently beneath the surface, so we leveled off deep and set our course for Baffin Bay. We went along the east coast, past Newfoundland, through the Davis Straits and on to Baffin Bay. The crew soon settled down to routine activities. Everything on board a submarine is thoughtfully designed. The crew's mess is also their recreation room. Even wall surfaces are the result of long research. They must be cleaned with water alone because chemical cleaning solvents and even some detergents could contaminate the air. My bunk isn't just a bunk. When not in use, it folds away and I have a table and chairs. The Seadragon had some very special equipment. Beside the regular fathometer that showed distance to the ocean floor, we had others to profile the ice over our heads. Then we had a new piece of electronic gear, which I'm not allowed to show you, an iceberg detector. We also had a TV camera mounted forward. This was our electronic window, and through it we saw some amazing sights. We had been steaming along under the Baffin Bay pack ice for hours, looking for a polynya in which to surface. A polynya is a big hole in the ice. The electronic gear was working perfectly, and we found an opening about 800 yards long. Through the periscope, I saw one of the most fantastic sights I've ever seen. The great gleaming field of moving broken ice stretched as far as you could see. It's beautiful, but dangerous to the propellers. So we submerged again to go hunting for icebergs. We had a conference. With me were Commodore Robertson, Royal Canadian Navy, our Arctic advisor, Lieutenant Burkhalter, the navigator, Walt Whitman, the ice forecaster, Dr. Waldo Lyon, chief scientist, and Art Malloy, the hydrographer. We decided to head for Cape York, Greenland, spawning ground for most of the great Arctic icebergs. The periscope showed a big one dead ahead, just where the iceberg detector said it would be. We surfaced and our special tracking party for iceberg measurement went to work. There were icebergs all around us, gleaming brightly in the sun. We counted no less than 45. The Seadragon was in the middle of a gigantic parade. Our attention was drawn to an unusually magnificent berg, with a hole in it as big as an automobile tunnel. At 1,000 yards, it was spectacular. The photographic team broke out a rubber life raft. They wanted to get some closer shots and also to get some pictures of the Seadragon near the iceberg. Our scuba party took this opportunity to go over the side and test their gear here in open water. Also, they needed to get acclimated to sub-freezing temperatures for the work under the ice that lay ahead. Their gear was working perfectly, and I decided to let them go over to the berg to study the underside and take some pictures. Our plans for testing the scuba gear came to an abrupt halt, however, when the lookout sighted a killer whale 200 feet off the beam. I was not going to take any chances with killer whales, so I regretfully ordered them back on board. While Jim Strong, my exec, rode the photographic team into position, there was a great crash, and the big iceberg tilted by 8 feet. Right then, I decided that neither the rubber boat nor the scuba divers were going near this or any other iceberg. At the end opposite the tunnel, we were delighted to see the face of a benign old man sculptured in the ice. It looked something like Theodore Roosevelt. We were the first submarine to pass under an iceberg, and in the days that followed, we went under a lot of them. They were all sizes and shapes, and we made reams of measurements. There was one nearly 900 feet wide and 1,470 feet long. It was so huge we had problems with our measuring equipment. It was deeper than we thought. We got under it all right, but it was too close for comfort. Altogether, we passed under icebergs 22 times, and as I looked over our data, I was surprised to see the wide difference between what we had expected and what we actually found. It was time to get on with our next project, so we submerged and set our course for the Northwest Passage. We sailed from Cape York to Lancaster Sound, the beginning of Perry Channel. Cunningham Glacier marks the entrance. We surfaced to take a look and then steered within 4 miles of shore. I'm afraid the chill 38-degree weather and 40-knot wind cooled the enthusiasm of the men, but we did get a good look at the great gray tongues of the massive glacier. Lancaster Sound is deep and wide, so we passed easily on to Resolute Bay, an important Canadian weather station. On the 16th of August, we neared Resolute. It was the second anniversary of the launching of the Seadragon and a sentimental occasion. Awards were handed out and the special cake was cut. It's one of those times when you don't mind admitting that a submarine crew is a pretty special kind of family. Next day, in answer to our radioed invitation, Squadron Leader Milliken, commander of the Resolute base, came for dinner. With him were Flight Lieutenant Ustan and Paul Adams of the U.S. Weather Bureau. They seemed quite pleased to be aboard the first submarine ever to be in those waters. Our Canadian friends could give us little advice about the treacherous Barrow Strait. It was always clogged with ice. The depth of the water was unknown, and the charts were inaccurate. As we got into the Strait, Art Malloy worked overtime, checking fathometer readings from above and below us. A careful watch was kept on the oxygen content of our vital air supply. Every detail of submarine operation had to have special attention. When you have pack ice overhead, you can't service anytime you want. The trip through Barrow Strait is something none of us will ever forget. There were great peaks and valleys completely uncharted. But we found a passage that is good for year-round use by nuclear submarines, regardless of ice conditions. We passed under the ice of Viscount Melville Sound at 16 knots, entered the Beaufort Sea, and surfaced off Land's End. We'd made it. We were the first submarine to go through the Northwest Passage. We radioed our new commander-in-chief at Pearl Harbor, reporting for duty. Now our families could know what we've been up to. Once again, we submerged to travel under the ice toward our next objective, the North Pole.
I know a bit about navigation, but the idea of navigating a ship under ice is way beyond me. Just looking at all that electronic gear would stop me cold. But now, let's take a moment out for this message.
As we steamed toward the North Pole, we checked all our equipment very carefully. The routine of keeping the Seadragon in fighting trim goes on endlessly. The temperatures and water conditions in the polar region offer certain problems, and so tests of our torpedo equipment were on a regular schedule. We'd had quite a time. We'd been under icebergs, we'd come up into Polinyas, and had plenty of excitement in Barrow Strait. But first, last, and always, the Seadragon is a fighting ship, and the crew takes a tremendous pride in keeping her in trim. To me, the men of the submarine service are pretty special. The senior technicians always make time for instruction under operating conditions. As a result, many of the younger men earned higher ratings on our voyage. Part of our plan was to come up at the North Pole. As we came close, we started to look for a Polinya so we could surface. Just when we'd spotted the first one, the stylus on our upward fathometer broke, and we couldn't take a reading. In the few moments it took to fix it, we lost sight of the Polinya. It took 10.5 hours before we could find another. But it was a good one, covered with about 2 inches of ice and only 12 miles from the pole. It was a good 50 yards to the edge of the Polinya, so I had to break the ice for the rubber boats. No sooner had I started for a mooring than our new fleet commander-in-chief, Admiral Hopwood, called me on the radio, and I had to make him wait. Admiral shouldn't be kept waiting, but he was very gracious. The men were already on the ice by the time I was off the radio. I had announced previously that due to science and skill, the officers and chief petty officers could overcome the youth and inexperience of their juniors in a baseball game. They were ready for us. That was the wildest ball game I ever saw. The bases were unused gloves. They slid all over the place, and there was more tackling than tagging. When you hit a home run at the pole, you have to run all the way around the world to touch home base. I made a spectacular miss of a high fly and slid flat out all the way across a frozen melt pool. We lost 13-10. None of our detection gear spotted his approach, but we were not surprised when Santa Claus welcomed us to his domain. One of the operations scheduled for the pole was some under-ice reconnaissance by the scuba team led by Lieutenant Glenn Brewer. He was pretty unhappy about the short time I allowed him, but the divers got some remarkable films. As a matter of fact, the first pictures ever seen of this strange world under the polar ice. It was time for us to get underway again. We had completed the serious work of collecting samples and data. Lieutenant Burkhalter proved here at the pole that our navigation equipment had been accurate beyond our fondest hope. It was time to submerge and head south. We went into a vertical dive. Your aim is to get neutral buoyancy at a specific depth. The chief of the watch opens the main vents, and there's a great rushing roar of air and water. The submarine settles down at a slight angle. It accelerates downward, and some of the water has to be pumped out again, or you'll keep right on going. We set our course under the ice to the Chukchi Sea and on to Nome, Alaska. We were all pretty tired when we left the pole. Between work and play, no one got much sleep. So the men settled down to some relaxation and hearty meals. You couldn't complain about the quality, and certainly not the quantity of food. Some of them really ate. Others in the crew wrote letters home so they could be mailed with our special cover when we reached Nome. Still others fought it out for the cribbage championship of the Arctic Ocean. It was a real contest. My second in command, Lieutenant Commander Jim Strong, took on all comers and won hands down. We were still headed for a trouble spot, the shallow Chukchi Sea, where ice ridges nearly touched the bottom. On the way, we had time to study our TV monitor and the eerie panorama of the ice passing overhead. Our electronic window on the underwater world was a source of constant fascination to it. In one particular spot, we saw strong markings of algae on the underside of the ice. We could see the same thing from our periscope as we surfaced. No place in the Arctic ice pack seemed to be devoid of some form of life. We were getting close to the Chukchi Sea, and once more, success or failure would depend upon designer Art Rochon's electronic gear. We were dodging around and under ice ridges with only 30 feet under our keel and just 30 over our heads. At last, the ice overhead began to thin out. Our electronic gear had come through for us again. We were free of the Arctic ice pack. We'd made it. We arrived in Nome on schedule. Since there's no harbor, the icebreaker Northwind served as our station ship. Nome looked awfully good to us, and we were quite surprised at the number of people who turned out for our welcome. The North Wind wasn't built to have submarines moored next to her, and so it took some time. Soon, Rear Admiral Caldwell, commander of the Alaskan Sea Frontier, came aboard with his party. We had many messages of congratulations, including one from the President of the United States. We had a wonderful reception, and I don't think I've ever seen more hospitable people. There were speeches and many invitations. I was officially greeted for the city of Nome by its beauty queen, a very charming part Eskimo girl. I received for the ship a scroll made of sealskin and a kiss from the pretty queen. The people in Nome were wonderful to us, but we were anxious to get to Pearl Harbor and join our families. On the morning of September 14, 1960, the Seadragon steamed into Pearl Harbor. Helicopters were dropping orchid petals. One of them hovered over and brought us a giant lei to drape over our sail. Fireboats became great moving fountains. As we steamed up to the pier, we could hear the welcoming cheers. Naturally, there were hula girls as part of a Hawaiian welcome. As soon as we came alongside, the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, Admiral Sides, came aboard. With him was my new boss, Rear Admiral Benson, Commander of the Pacific Submarine Fleet. Of course, family reunions don't come under strict Navy regulations, so there's a certain informality about them, but they are pretty wonderful. We all gathered for the official reception. Now it was Navy again and very formal, with Admiral Benson officiating. He was enthusiastic about the achievements of the Seadragon. We were honored with a Navy unit commendation, the pennant the Seadragon will always carry. Admiral Benson presented me with the Legion of Merit, and as he leaned over to pin it on, he said quietly, "Last time I did this, I pinned my glove to the guy's uniform. He's quite a man." He asked me if I had anything to say, and I did. I wanted the families to know what a wonderful job had been done by each and every man in the crew. They could be proud of their husbands and fathers. We'd been given the task of finding a Northwest Passage for submarines, and we'd done it. Our success was due to the combination of great equipment and superb personnel to make it work.
We've heard the remarkable saga of the Seadragon from its captain, Commander Steele. And now, Commander, I wonder if you'd tell us what you consider was the Seadragon's main achievement.
Well, John, we've got our own private ocean up there where only nuclear submarines can operate. And the most powerful nations of the world rem that ocean.
Well, you must be very proud of your achievement.
I'm very proud of my ship, and I'm very proud of my crew.
Well, before you leave, Commander, do me a favor.
If I can.
Autograph my copy of the book you wrote about this voyage, Seadragon, Northwest Under the Ice, because I wished we'd had time tonight to cover the story as fully as you do in your fascinating book.
Well, I'd be glad to, but believe me, I'd rather sail the Northwest Passage on top or underneath the ice than have to write another book about it.
Have you anything further to add?
Yes. American submarines were the first into the Arctic, and we intend to stay there.
Good. And I want to thank you for being with us and letting us share your experience.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
And I also want to express our thanks to the United States Navy for their cooperation in making available the films of this wonderful achievement. And also congratulations to the men who developed the remarkable navigational equipment that made this voyage possible. Our next expedition is truly a unique experience, and I hope that all of you will make a special effort to watch it. It's an exciting picture of a place rarely seen even by explorers. Until then, this is John Craig saying thank you and good night.